Society isn't just made up of people, laws, and structures. It's shaped by stories, symbols, and myths, things that give us a sense of identity, purpose, and belonging. But these aren't just passive stories. They set standards for our actions, define our values, and shape what we believe to be true. In this episode of Social Theory Today, we're exploring how myths and symbols shape society, and how institutions reinforce these narratives, making them feel objective and real. In social theory, structural analysis reveals that the meaning of symbols and myths doesn't come from what they represent on their own. Instead, they gain power through their relationships and oppositions within a larger system. Anthropologist David Graeber provides a fascinating example with vampires and werewolves. Both are monsters with the power to transform others into their kind, but they're also symbolic opposites. Vampires are rich, aristocratic, and in control. They're usually bound to castles or crypts. Werewolves, on the other hand, are often poor, wild, and constantly on the move. In structural terms, each represents the opposite of the other. This structured contrast gives each myth its power. Vampires and werewolves aren't just horror tropes. They're reflections of broader social anxieties about wealth, control, and freedom. And the oppositions run deep. Each can only be destroyed by something symbolic of its own negation. Vampires by a simple wooden stake, a tool accessible to common people. Werewolves by a silver bullet, a refined object made from something valuable. Graeber's example shows us that meaning is built through relationships, with each myth drawing significance from its counterpart. In Social Accreditation Theory, or SAT, structural analysis helps us understand how symbols, myths, and social roles gain meaning and power through their place in a larger system. Our identities and actions aren't just personal choices. They're influenced by myths that set standards for what's admirable, what's shameful, and what's expected. By examining the relationships between these symbols, SAT shows us how social norms are reinforced across generations. When someone is awarded for bravery or recognized as a good leader, they're not just receiving praise. They're stepping into an accredited role, a symbol of what society values. Each role, each symbol, each myth gains its meaning from the others in the system. The hero archetype, for example, only has power when defined against the villain or the coward. In this structured web of symbols, our identities and behaviors are shaped and validated by the relationships around us. Language is central to this structure. Linguist Ferdinand de Saussure taught us that words gain meaning through difference. They're defined not by what they represent, but by their contrast with other words. This concept extends to symbols, myths, and social roles. Roland Barthes expanded on this, showing that myths transform cultural values into what we see as natural truths. In our society, heroes are celebrated for courage, while villains are condemned for selfishness. This contrast isn't just a story, it's a framework for understanding morality. Through SAT, we see how language and myth work together to accredit certain behaviors as right or good, while sanctioning others as wrong. Language shapes how we view not only individual actions, but entire social roles and values. Myths also shape social norms through archetypes, recurring characters that represent universal traits. Joseph Campbell famously explored these archetypes, particularly in the hero's journey. Heroes, mentors, and even villains are more than characters. They're templates that define the behaviors we admire, condemn, or fear. Each archetype sets a standard, reinforcing certain values that are celebrated across cultures. Through SAT, we see how myths use archetypes to validate traits like courage, wisdom, and sacrifice. A hero's story isn't just entertaining, it accredits bravery as a cultural ideal. By contrast, the villain archetype reinforces which behaviors society condemns. These archetypes act as guidelines, structuring how we see others and how we see ourselves. Institutions play a critical role in accrediting and sustaining these myths, embedding them into society's structures. Established religions, nation-states, corporations, and agencies don't just passively reflect myths. They reinforce them through rituals, symbols, and accreditation processes. Each institution validates certain narratives, making them feel timeless and true. In religion, rituals and symbols like the cross or the crescent are more than images. They represent beliefs that are continually accredited through sermons, prayers, and practices. Similarly, Nation-states use symbols like flags and anthems to accredit myths of unity, freedom, or strength. These rituals remind citizens of their shared identity, reinforcing these values as cornerstones of the nation. Corporations also accredit myths through branding, creating a narrative around success, innovation, or prestige. When we see a logo like Apple's or McDonald's, we don't just see a brand, we see a symbol of a story, one that's been carefully crafted and validated over decades. Through these repeated acts of accreditation, these myths and symbols become embedded in our collective consciousness, shaping our choices and beliefs. These myths and symbols don't just shape society from the top down, they mediate our everyday interactions, giving meaning to the way we communicate, interpret, and understand one another. Through SAT, we understand that our intersubjective interactions, our shared social reality, are guided by these accredited myths and symbols. Each time we use these symbols in conversation or ceremony, we validate the myth. When we acknowledge a degree, a wedding ring, or a national flag, we're reaffirming the meaning it holds in society. Through these intersubjective interactions, myths are sustained, reinforced, and transmitted across generations, subtly influencing how we perceive what's good, valuable, or true. By using structural analysis, SAT reveals the power of myths and symbols to shape our world. These narratives, accredited by institutions and reinforced through our interactions, set the standards for social norms, defining the values we hold and the behaviors we reward or condemn. Myths are more than stories. They're frameworks that guide our actions and beliefs, built into the very foundation of society. So, as we explore SAT, we're uncovering the invisible structures that shape us, showing us that our identities, values, and actions are part of a much larger story. By understanding this, we gain the power to navigate, question, and even reshape the myths that define our world. Thanks for watching Social Theory today. Join us next time as we explore more about the forces that shape our lives.